carrying a worn sack. She entered a bank and requested her office, prompting laughter, until they viewed the documents capable of causing significant damage. She proceeded with a familiarity suggesting repeated visits. There was no uncertainty, no faltering, just a deliberate, measured pace. Odessa Bell Jenkins, 74 years old, with skin resembling dried tobacco leaves and eyes as keen as glass, opened the door to Hamilton First Bank in downtown Modesto. Initially, she attracted no attention. The air conditioning created a distracting hum. The sound of phones filled the air, and fingers moved quickly over keyboards. Odessa was not in professional attire. She wore a faded blue dress, worn orthopedic shoes, and a wide-brimmed straw hat reminiscent of a 1960s Sears catalog. A well-worn canvas sack, marked with hand-stitched initials OBJ, was slung over her shoulder. She moved to the center of the lobby and paused. "Excuse me," she stated, her voice calm and easily heard. "I require access to my office, please." The young teller stationed at window 2 did not acknowledge her. "Madam, if you're here to make a deposit, you'll need to take a number." "I am not here to make a deposit." He looked thin, as did the woman beside him and the assistant manager near the back. The silence that followed was not heavy or dramatic. It was simply awkward. Everyone seemed to expect her to explain herself, and she didn't feel any rush to do so. "You said your office," the teller asked, clearly confused. Odessa nodded once. "Top floor, behind the frosted glass. Used to be my grandfather's. I'm here to retrieve it." That's when the laughter began. Initially, it was subtle, originating from a young woman close to the counter. Then a cough, someone attempting to suppress it by clearing their throat. The security guard lifted an eyebrow and moved forward from his chair. "You own this bank?" The teller inquired, now smiling. "Ma'am, this is Hamilton First. It's a corporate bank, not a diner. Are you certain you're in the correct building?" Odessa didn't blink. Instead, she placed the sack from her shoulder and carefully set it on the tile floor. The zipper was stiff due to years of dust, but it opened silently. A folded birth certificate emerged, along with a stack of parchment-colored documents, and a glossy black and white photograph depicting a black man in a double-breasted suit shaking hands with a white man before a building strikingly similar to this one. Following this, she placed a single page, formerly framed and now laminated to preserve it against age. At the bottom, in fading ink, was a signature that remained legible, E.H. Hamilton. The lobby fell silent. The teller bent closer, examining the page. His complexion drained. The assistant manager advanced, his gaze fixed. "Where did you obtain these?" he inquired. "My grandfather gave them to me," Odessa responded. "Before he passed, he instructed me to safeguard them. He said the world would forget. But paper remembers, ma'am. This simply cannot be genuine." Odessa inclined her head. "Do you have a legal department? Perhaps you should contact them." The manager, Mr. Lyles, emerged from behind the counter, his name tag clearly visible. He appeared older than the others, likely in his mid-50s, with thinning hair and a shirt that strained to the buttons. "Let's go somewhere private, Miss Jenkins." "Odessa Bell Jenkins." "Miss Jenkins, if this is some kind of mistake, it's not. And I prefer we talk up there." She indicated the top floor behind the glass panel, the same one she'd mentioned earlier. He paused, looking around. Finally, he offered a small nod to the security guard. They would take her to the conference room. They led her past curious stares and side glances. Odessa walked slowly, unbothered. She did not gloat. She did not explain herself. Her sack bounced lightly at her side with every step. She was not there to prove anything. She was there because something was overdue. But before they reached the elevator, someone asked a question that changed the temperature of the room entirely. "What's in that bag?" inquired Lyles, the assistant manager. His voice attempted composure, though his eyes betrayed his concern. Odessa paused, turned toward him, and regarded him as if anticipating the question since that morning. "Proof," she stated plainly. "Proof that this place doesn't belong to who you think it does there." The atmosphere in the third-floor conference room felt constricted. Perhaps it was the low ceiling or the windows that hadn't been cleaned in months. Or perhaps it was the silence that fell between them as Odessa emptied the rest of the sack onto the long table. She didn't handle things carelessly or make a display of it. She placed each item deliberately, one by one. Original land deeds, typewritten stock certificates with embossed seals, correspondence between her grandfather Elijah Jenkins and Ernest Hamilton, the bank's namesake. Some pages were brittle, faded. Several others possessed markings that appeared newly imprinted. Lyles observed the stack. His mouth slightly opened, but he remained silent. Odessa retrieved a paper from the middle and pushed it towards him. She advised, begin with that. He grasped the document carefully, as if it were fragile. His gaze quickly scanned the words. Transfer of controlling interest. It was signed in 1957 by Elijah Jenkins. What is this? He asked. The true ownership, Odessa explained, prior to Hamilton's involvement with Western Consolidated. My grandfather held the largest stake, yet the original name persisted. Records were manipulated to remove any trace of him, a highly improbable event. The Jenkins name doesn't appear in our records, she stated, shrugging. Not all information is archived when individuals desire its suppression. Lyles massaged his temple. Are you suggesting your grandfather owned this bank? What motive would he have for concealing that? She replied, he wasn't hiding anything. He was forced out under unfair conditions. Shares were promised, but never officially registered. The merger in 1974? That was simply a more complex term for theft. The assistant manager began to protest, but reconsidered. He then retrieved his phone and activated the screen. He announced his intention to contact corporate headquarters. Odessa showed no reaction. She deliberately placed the final document, a notarized affidavit signed by Ernest Hamilton, acknowledging Elijah Jenkins as co-founder and majority shareholder in the original charter. Lyles avoided eye contact, moving back and forth as the phone connected. This is Joseph Lyles at Modesto Branch 142. We are experiencing a situation. A person is present, asserting ownership, rights tracing back to the founding. Odessa's hand rested on the table. She was present to wait, not to argue or beg. They possessed documents. Originals. No, I am not joking. He listened, his eyes shifting back to her. Okay. Yes, I will secure the room. He ended the call a minute later. Regional Legal is dispatching a team. They anticipate arrival within a couple of hours. Odessa nodded once. We are also retrieving the historic records from the vault downstairs. Lyles added, if this is genuine, they'll want everything clearly presented. She smiled faintly. You should have prepared that information years ago. An hour elapsed, then another. During that period, Odessa spoke infrequently. She primarily gazed out the window, occasionally taking sips of water brought by a nervous intern who remained silent. However, activity was underway downstairs. Those who had scarcely noticed her before were now murmuring in hushed tones, discreetly looking towards the conference room window as if it held a disturbing event. In reality, it wasn't a crime, not in the manner they envisioned. However, what Odessa presented was more than just documents. It carried significance. It represented history, memory, and ownership. Certain individuals within the building were beginning to sense its impact. Yet, the true tremor didn't stem from what she had already displayed, but from what remained unseen. When the regional legal team from Sacramento arrived, consisting of 3 men in sharp suits and a woman carrying a briefcase seemingly heavier than Odessa's sack, a palpable tension filled the room. Odessa remained seated, her composure unwavering, with her hands folded in her lap as if awaiting Sunday service. Bryce Hanley, the lead attorney, bypassed introductions altogether. He placed his leather-bound binder on the table, offering Odessa a half-smile, which was polite but lacked sincerity. We understand you're claiming part ownership of this bank, he said, already flipping through her documents as if they were museum artifacts. I'm just here to verify and advise our client on next steps. Odessa didn't flinch. I'm not claiming anything. I'm here to reclaim what my grandfather built. Hanley glanced at Lyles. We'll need copies of all this. Originals can't leave the premises, but we'll digitize them for analysis. Odessa didn't answer immediately. Instead, she retrieved a folded letter from her purse. The paper showed creases, and the ink had bled slightly at the edges, but the signature at the bottom was legible. "This is from Elijah Jenkins," she stated, placing it before them. "He composed this in 1961, noting his fear that someone would take what belonged to him. And they did." Hanley read the letter, then gave it to the woman next to him. "You want us to believe your grandfather was forced out of his own bank without anyone taking notice?" Odessa's eyes narrowed just slightly. Nobody seemed to want to investigate. "Do you believe those initial shareholders maintained accurate records?" The Jenkins family lost their majority ownership and became essentially irrelevant within less than 10 years. And the question of how went unasked, because there was a general lack of interest. "We weren't the kind of family people erected monuments for." Lyles subtly adjusted his position. "But the Hamilton name. Elijah and Ernest were partners," Odessa pointed out. "They established this place in the 30s, but only one of them received recognition. Can you guess who was included in the historical accounts?" Hanley scratched the back of his neck. "Even if all of this is true," he said, "you need to prove continuity of ownership. Paper trails, tax filings. They're all in that sack," Odessa replied. "I've been filing claims with county officers since I was 28. Every year, every decade, even after my husband died, quietly, patiently, because my grandfather told me one day the truth will be heavier than the lies." The room fell quiet. Selina Miles, the junior attorney, glanced up from a typed ledger. "This is considerable. Where did you locate some of these?" "In a church basement. In my uncle's attic. In city archives that were unaware of their contents. I dedicated the majority of my retirement to compiling it all." Hanley's smile had vanished. He tapped his pen on the table. "Do you realize this might initiate a lawsuit?" "I anticipate it," Odessa replied. Her voice held no pretense, only certainty. She wasn't present seeking assistance. She came because she possessed documentation. Lyles, who had remained quiet previously, advanced forward at last. "Miss Jenkins, why at this time?" Odessa hesitated before responding. "Because you all ridiculed." She stated it without malice. Simply a statement of fact. "I entered with a past that no one felt the need to recall. I observed the name Jenkins removed from each annual report, each plaque. For years, I convinced myself it was unimportant. But this place? It's constructed upon what my grandfather initiated, on what we forfeited. After all these years, after all the waiting, I figured it's time someone remembered." Hanley rubbed his eyes. "We're going to need to bring in senior counsel." "Good," Odessa said, sliding the last sheet across the table. "They'll want to see this." It was a black ledger, smaller than the rest, handwritten in tight, neat lines. "Ernest's private account book," she said. "Found it in a box marked receipts in a retired accountant's garage in Madeira. This document details every transfer, every dividend, every instance Jenkins' shares were reallocated without our consent." Hanley appeared visibly stunned. Selina reacted by covering her mouth. "Are you saying this was concealed?" she asked. "No," Odessa replied. "It was overlooked." Which is more concerning. As the attorneys examined the ledger, none of them noticed what Odessa observed through the glass. The face of someone documenting everything with their phone, positioned just beyond the door. The video had already been sent to the incorrect recipient before anyone in the room realized. A bank employee, appearing young, possibly 22, with their name tag turned away, had briefly paused outside the glass, observing 30 seconds of Odessa's quiet revolution. A woman with a lined face and a ledger, steadily turning through years of obscured facts, was visible. Inside, Bryce Hanley peered at the document before him, as if it might ignite. The contents of this ledger significantly altered the situation. Odessa remained silent. She allowed the pause to linger until another person interrupted it. It was the assistant manager, Lyles, his voice raspy. "That's Ernest Hamilton's handwriting." He continued, "We maintain samples for verification." "That's his," Selina confirmed. "And these aren't merely notes. They represent unauthorized adjustments. Dividend transfers, forged proxy votes, even ghost shareholders." Hanley reclined in his chair. Access to internal systems must be suspended until we fully assess the scope of this situation. The board will require a complete overview of everything. Odessa reacted with a slight head tilt. He disregarded her comment that the board would be accountable for the repercussions. How did you obtain this? I inquired. I contacted the relevant individuals, he replied, through personal visits and correspondence. Most people were either unwilling or unable to cooperate, either due to age or a sense of guilt. However, a retired CPA, Douglas Nunn, residing in Madeira, retained records that he was never instructed to destroy. Hanley wrote in his notebook, a sense of frustration beginning to surface beneath his professional demeanor. Potential corporate liability, a breach of fiduciary duty, and misrepresentation of historical records were all possibilities. Odessa interjected. And theft. The word resonated sharply. It hadn't been described that way previously, she explained. They had simply referred to it as a rebranding. But altering names and concealing origins is still theft. Selena examined the pages. Evidence was apparent. There were old checks, fabricated board minutes, and missed filings during the consolidation years. The regional director appeared abruptly. Her name was Diane Cole, in her late 40s, wearing a red blazer with hair styled sharply. She entered with the confident stride of someone accustomed to authority. Brief me, she stated, her gaze already surveying the room. Hanley rose. Miss Jenkins provided a comprehensive record of family ownership history originating from the bank's inception, including this ledger, private accounts, and probable Hamiltons, which indicate unauthorized share transfers. Cole handled the ledger as if it were fragile. She quickly reviewed the pages, then paused at a folded page. Her expression showed concern. Could this be genuine? Odessa met her gaze directly. You decide. Cole sat down, placed the ledger to the side, and folded her hands. Miss Jenkins, should this prove to be as it seems, it may initiate state inquiries, possibly federal ones. Do you grasp the magnitude of the situation? I do. I'm familiar with it, having dealt with it for decades. Cole addressed Hanley. What is our potential liability? He paused. If this ledger is verified, and verification is anticipated, the repercussions extend beyond public relations. It involves shareholder fraud, a false portrayal of history, and likely a pattern of financial discrimination. Notification of regulatory agencies may be necessary. Lyle, who had been silent until now, murmured, we could lose the charter. Odessa finally moved forward. I didn't come to dismantle it, she stated. I came to ensure its integrity. They regarded her with disbelief. Do you believe I desire your positions, your authority? She questioned. My grandfather didn't establish this place for me to destroy it. However, I will not permit it to be sustained by falsehoods any longer. Cole nodded deliberately. You're not requesting a financial contribution, are you? He asked. No, Odessa replied. I'm requesting that my family's name be restored to its rightful place, on the records, on the wall, and on the founding documents. If that isn't possible, I will pursue legal action through the courts. For a brief silence, no one stirred. Then Hanley rose. I'm going to contact headquarters. He continued. I believe we should cease acting as though this is merely a misunderstanding. Selena carefully collected the papers, treating them with the reverence due to historical documents. Outside the door, phones began to illuminate. The news had circulated. A local reporter was already downstairs inquiring about the elderly woman asserting ownership of the bank. Cole glanced out the window, then turned to Odessa. Do you feel prepared for this to become difficult? Odessa offered a slight smile. Darling, I have endured hardship. I am ready for authenticity. While the building prepared for legal challenges, Odessa sensed a more profound consequence, as justice often resonates beyond legal proceedings. As the sun set behind the office buildings in downtown Modesto, the news had already escaped the bank's confines. A journalist from the Valley Record waited outside the glass doors, equipped with a notepad and a camera. Her name was Eleanor Cruz, mid-30s, with a blunt haircut and a direct manner. She had not been assigned to the story. She arrived alone, having heard rumors from a cousin employed in the building. Within, people behaved differently. Staff who had previously dismissed her were now quiet, quickly passing documents between offices and avoiding Odessa's gaze. Others, primarily younger tellers, regarded her with a peculiar sense of wonder, as if they were only now understanding they might be working in a building constructed upon someone else's misappropriated narrative. Cole stood near the windows, arms folded, observing the unfolding events as if they were a chess game she hadn't anticipated playing that day. "She's going to want a statement," she said, nodding towards the reporter. Odessa didn't raise her head from her seat. "Let her in." "Are you sure?" she responded. "Let her in," Cole repeated. "I'm not hiding." Shortly after, Elena entered the conference room, her camera hanging from her shoulder, the recorder already running. "I'm told you have evidence this bank doesn't own what it claims to own." Odessa remained steadfast. "I have evidence to show it always has, not entirely." "And who are you?" "Odessa Bell Jenkins, granddaughter of Elijah Jenkins, the man who helped establish this institution and was erased from historical accounts, not even receiving a footnote." Elena positioned herself opposite her. "That's a significant assertion." "It is not an assertion, but a documented history," Odessa stated. "All the necessary information is on that table." The reporter looked to Cole. "Is this being given due consideration?" Cole released a breath, a tightness in her shoulders. "A thorough review of archived material spanning decades, alongside recent documentation submitted by Miss Jenkins, is underway. The situation is indeed significant." Elena glanced back at Odessa. "Why today? Why now?" Odessa moved forward, her hands clasped. "Because I've buried too many people who waited for the world to show concern." Her mother would weep whenever she passed this building. She had worked at the post office across the street for 28 years, witnessing the name Jenkins vanish from the foundation plaque. "She passed away before I had the chance to show her that it mattered." Elena paused briefly, then spoke softly. "You're not pursuing this for financial gain?" Odessa smiled, a weary expression on her face. "Child, if I desired money, I could have sold these documents to a lawyer years ago. But what value is money compared to a legacy?" Hanley, still on the telephone across the room, disconnected the call. "Headquarters has authorized the commencement of internal investigation procedures, starting immediately." "And the founder's plaque?" Odessa inquired. Cole responded. "A replacement will be ordered, including both names, Hamilton and Jenkins." "That's acceptable," Odessa stated, her tone even. "However, I require the original to be sent to me. My grandfather's name shouldn't have been removed initially." Elena recorded a note. "Do you believe this account will motivate others?" Odessa offered a quiet chuckle. "I'm not concerned with inspiration. My focus is on whether it will alert people. Families are frequently victimized, not through violence, but through suppression, documentation suppression. The absence of a signature wouldn't draw scrutiny if the person who was missing resembled me." Externally, the narrative had already started circulating online. Several photos appeared. A brief video showed Odessa setting the ledger onto the table. Numerous comments, hundreds of shares followed. People were inquiring about the history of Hamilton First Bank. Speculation arose regarding how many other names might have been removed to provide reassurance. Inside, the bank's lobby remained calm. This wasn't due to embarrassment but acknowledgement. Cole stood, straightening her blazer. "A public statement, a formal apology, will be released within the next 24 hours. An offer for partnership will also be extended should Miss Jenkins accept." Odessa gazed out the window. The street lights began to illuminate the area below. Across the street, the post office was already closed. She contemplated what her mother would have thought had she lived to witness this. "I'm not here for a deal," she stated. "I am here to restore my grandfather's name to prominence. If you choose to resolve this without further legal action, I would consider that a positive first step. However, an apology would only hold significance if people recalled the reasons behind it, and that responsibility extends beyond the bank." By morning, news had broken. The story appeared on the front page of the Valley Record, circulating through social media and talk shows. Odessa Bell Jenkins, the woman who entered a bank with a sack and exited with history. News reports presented a simplified version of events. But what Odessa held was more than just history. It was a tapestry of memory woven with pain, patience, and documented evidence. The bank released a public statement shortly before noon. They described it as an error in historical representation and a profoundly regrettable exclusion from the bank's initial acknowledgement. Legal professionals had examined sufficient material to determine it wasn't a mere mistake, but a recurring issue. And it had taken one woman and one sack to expose the truth. In her simple home just outside Ceres, Odessa was seated in her preferred chair, holding a cracked coffee mug. The bag, now almost empty, rested folded on the coffee table. Beside it were the aged ledger and a new brass nameplate. Jenkins and Hamilton, founders, arrived by courier that morning, accompanied by a handwritten note from Diane Cole. The note stated, "We hope this small gesture marks a beginning, not an end. You reminded us what truth sounds like when it stands its ground." Mr. Ridgway, her neighbor, a retired mechanic who formerly waved but rarely engaged in conversation, arrived with banana bread and inquired if she would be willing to speak at the local college. Odessa laughed, saying, "Let me catch my breath first," to him. However, internally, something had shifted. It wasn't precisely pride, nor was it revenge. It was peace, because sometimes the most difficult aspect isn't revealing what was done to you, but waiting long enough for someone to notice that it occurred. Following 3 days, the bank held a private ceremony within their recently renamed Jenkins Hamilton Founders Hall. Odessa was present, wearing a navy blue suit and the familiar straw hat. She refrained from smiling for the photographers and avoided the customary politician's handshake. Instead, she stood before the new plaque, gently touched her grandfather's name, and quietly murmured, "You're home now." Elena Cruz was also in attendance, documenting the event with photographs and interviews for a subsequent article. Later, she inquired of Odessa what counsel she would offer to individuals carrying a past veiled by obscurity and quietude. "Do not seek authorization to share your narrative," Odessa stated. "Certain individuals may resist hearing it, but that does not diminish its validity." As the attendees commenced their departures, a youthful bank employee, the very same one who had chuckled on the initial day, approached her discreetly. Identifying himself as Daniel Ortiz, he offered, "I owe you an apology." "I didn't know. You didn't want to," Odessa responded kindly. "Indeed," he acknowledged, "you've altered my perspective on this place." "Thank you," she replied, offering him a measured glance. The wind rose and shook the doors as they shut behind her. The sun felt pleasant. Odessa's shoulders felt unburdened for the first time in a long time. She hadn't come to inflict harm. She came to reveal what ought never to have been hidden, not from resentment, but from affection. A deep affection for a man who instilled in her the understanding that truth requires patience. Affection for a family that warranted greater justice. Affection for each individual who has been forgotten simply because their memories were inconvenient. In the weeks that followed, other families began to come forward, inquiring about land deeds, property losses, and misfiled ownership records from decades past. Odessa did not intend to spearhead a movement, but her story had already ignited a spark. Because once people realized the silence wasn't accidental, they begin listening differently. And once they start listening, the world changes. So if you're holding a truth the world forgot, this story is for you. Do not let it decay in a drawer or vanish from your memory. Share it, safeguard it, and pass it on. Because occasionally, the softest voice in the room is the one that transforms everything. If Odessa's story resonated with you, share it. And subscribe to our channel for additional true stories that matter. It remains uncertain whose story will be shared next. A $1 million neighborhood was constructed on land that had been in his family for over a century. However, when Elijah presented a handwritten clause dated 1923, the entire development and every home within it legally reverted to his ownership. Elijah Jackson didn't require an alarm clock. For 30 years, he had woken naturally just before sunrise, made his coffee, and walked out to the back porch of his father's old farmhouse near Opelika, Alabama. From that quiet wooden deck, he had a clear view across the southern field, the very field where his great-grandfather Otis grew sweet potatoes in the 1930s, and where Elijah's own children had once played in the tall grass. But that morning, something was amiss. The ground felt altered. It trembled. Elijah peered into the distance. Beyond the trees, past the fence line, plumes of red dirt rose into the sky. The machinery was present, heavy, loud, and incongruous. He placed his coffee down and headed towards the sound. Reaching the ridge, he halted, stunned. 3 bulldozers were visible. Behind them, construction teams in hard hats and neon vests were marking the ground with flags, as if claiming it was unclaimed land. But it wasn't. He quickened his pace, the Georgia clay swirling up around his boots. "Hey," he called. A woman in a light gray blazer turned toward him, sunglasses and a clipboard in hand. She seemed out of place in a field. She appeared someone who had never worn work boots. "Can I assist you, sir?" she inquired, her voice suggesting she already anticipated the response. Elijah surveyed the scene. "What is the purpose of your presence on my land?" Her eyebrow showed little movement. This parcel was approved for residential development under West Haven HOA's expansion permit. "You must be mistaken." "Mistaken?" Elijah's voice rose slightly. "My name is Elijah Jackson. That piece of land has been in my family since 1923. It is not for sale. It never has been." The woman held her clipboard up like a shield. "County records indicate this section was listed as unclaimed due to boundary discrepancies during the last zoning update. You are welcome to speak with our legal team, but construction is already underway." Elijah's heart was thumping hard now, but not from fear. "Ma'am, that land is not unclaimed. I have walked it every morning since I was 27 years old. My father was born right over that rise. You're building on ground that holds more history than you could encompass with your permits." She offered a polite, empty smile. "Then I suggest you take it up with zoning and planning. We're moving forward." The machines revved louder behind her. Foundations were being dug. Trees that once shaded Elijah's childhood baseball games were now being stripped away root by root. He didn't yell. He didn't curse. He simply turned and walked back towards his house. His pace was slower now. Inside, he went directly to the cabinet above the fireplace. It held old papers, maps, and deeds, dusty and yellowed with age. He recalled his father once saying Otis didn't trust anybody with this land, not even the government. At the time, Elijah had considered it mere paranoia. But as the ground outside was being torn apart, that paranoia felt more like protection. He carefully unfolded the brittle deed and saw it. The faded ink revealed Otis Jackson's name. 88 acres were purchased for $480 in 1923. There were no loans, no banks involved. It was built on sweat, grit, and the unwavering pride of a man determined to leave nothing for anyone else to claim. Elijah settled down. Documents lay before him. A growing unease began in his stomach. Something felt amiss. This wasn't simply a clerical error. He reached for the phone and contacted the Lee County Zoning Office. "I'm calling regarding a construction crew impacting a portion of my property. My name is Elijah Jackson. My family has owned this land for over 100 years. The person I spoke with initially responded with a detached, scripted tone. They stated that if my land was affected by the zoning realignment, I should have received a mail notification. I did not receive any notification. They suggested that notices can occasionally be lost, and then ended the conversation. It was dismissed with that, lost. Potentially, decades of family ownership could be jeopardized by a misplaced envelope. However, Elijah wasn't solely feeling anger. He recalled a story his father had shared with him. Years had passed since Elijah had last touched the old trunk located at the back of the hallway closet. He pulled it out slowly, coughing as dust filled the narrow corridor. His knees cracked as he knelt, unlatching the brass lock. The lid opened with a tired creak. Inside, among black and white photos, funeral programs, and Otis's tarnished railroad watch, was a bundle of paper wrapped in oilcloth, precisely where his father indicated it would be. Elijah was seated on the floor, cross-legged, carefully unrolling the cloth and retrieving a weighty, leather-bound envelope. This was the original deed, the one Otis had kept for himself. Initially, it appeared like any other legal document: printed text, handwritten notes in the margins, a wax seal partially worn. However, concealed roughly midway through the second page, in Otis's faint, cursive writing, was something unexpected. In his own handwriting, squeezed into the margins, a note read, "If any buildings are built on this land without the agreement of the deed holder or their closest relative, those buildings will automatically belong to the deed holder and no payment will be given." This was witnessed and signed on February 2nd, 1923. Elijah blinked. He read it again and again. His hands trembled. He wasn't legally trained, unlike lawyers, but he knew the story behind that clause. It concerned how Otis had distrusted men in suits, particularly landmen. Following a near deception in 1931, where he almost sold half the property for a minimal price, Otis had personally compensated a notary to assist him in drafting what he termed a safeguard impenetrable to any attempt to bypass it. This safeguard wasn't constructed from physical materials like wood or wire. It was comprised of carefully chosen words. Elijah reached for the telephone once more. He contacted Mr. Boone, the local attorney his family had relied on for 3 generations. "I need to show you something," Elijah stated. "It's about the land, about Otis." After 3 hours, Elijah was seated in the worn leather armchair, facing Boone's desk. The lawyer peered through bifocals, carefully examining the document. "Well, I'll be," he remarked, tapping a knuckle against the clause. "You don't see this kind of thing anymore, but it's clever. If this was notarized and filed with the original deed, it's enforceable." "It is notarized," Elijah said. Otis made absolutely certain of that. Boone nodded. "It's old, yes, but if it's on the record, it's still the law. It might be buried in archives somewhere, but that doesn't make it disappear. So what do I do?" "First," Boone said, pulling a legal pad toward him, "you don't say a word to those developers. Let them build. Every house they finish becomes yours. It wasn't due to your identity, but because of Otis. That man didn't simply leave you land. He left you a carefully constructed snare. A remarkably clever one." Elijah relaxed, feeling the significance of it acutely. He's been prepared to initiate a conflict, enter courtrooms, and navigate bureaucratic hurdles to demonstrate what rightfully belonged to him. But Otis had already handled the struggle. Now, Elijah only needed to wait. Nevertheless, he wasn't foolish. He contacted 2 additional lawyers, just to be certain. One for Montgomery, one for Birmingham. He provided them with scanned copies of the deed, the clause, and the notarization. Both contacted him again within a week. "This is the most secure private property clause I've ever encountered," one stated, "Mr. Jackson. It's as if your great-grandfather constructed a legal landmine." The other remarked, "I've never seen anything like it. As long as you record the construction, everything they build becomes yours. Every nail, every foundation." Consequently, Elijah purchased a drone and employed a professional surveyor. Motion sensor cameras were installed along the southern field's edge. He meticulously documented everything. This included timestamps, recorded footage, ground measurements, copies of sale signs, and open house flyers. Each day, he observed the actions of the West Haven HOA, actions that he believed they should never have taken. They constructed as if they held absolute ownership and marketed as if they had the right to sell. But Elijah understood the truth. And Otis? Otis had anticipated this day for 100 years. If the clause proved to be true, Elijah understood he had a single course of action remaining: to wait. Each morning, shortly after sunrise, Elijah would position himself on the grassy ridge, the site of the former barbed wire fence. He would rest against the wooden post that he and his father had set into the ground many years prior, with his arms crossed and a camera around his neck, observing. The land below was undergoing change. Where sweet potatoes once grew and his cousin had broken his leg attempting to ride a makeshift dirt bike, now stood rows of modern homes. The exteriors featured vinyl siding in muted colors, fenced-in backyards, and driveways so smooth they didn't feel like they belonged in the country. It felt like watching someone else rearrange your childhood memories without permission. Roads were paved with names like Sycamore Lane and Sunset Walk. Pretty names, but lacking any history. Light poles were installed, sidewalks were poured, and even a cul-de-sac was added that cut right through the grove where Elijah's mother had planted muscadines. The HOA proceeded quickly. Too quickly. Within a month, foundations were set for 20 homes. Real estate agents began appearing on weekends, conducting open houses and offering guided tours to couples and retirees. Large signs near the front entrance announced, "Now selling," starting at $385,000. Elijah remained silent. He simply observed. He recorded everything. Daily drone footage was recorded. Close-up photos of property markers were taken. Videos documented workers pouring concrete, installing electrical lines, and setting frames. He organized all of this in a folder on his laptop labeled Otis's Revenge. Occasionally, a project manager or a site supervisor noticed him. Sometimes they waved. Once a man with a clipboard called out, "Morning," with forced cheerfulness. Elijah did not reply. His purpose was not to socialize. He was there to observe. Then Jessica arrived. Jessica Brenner. She remained consistently the woman she had always been, clipboard and blazer. Initially, she didn't recognize Elijah upon his reappearance at the Ridge. However, within 3 weeks, she began to acknowledge him. On one occasion, she smiled and called out, "Still watching us, Mr. Jackson?" Elijah responded by raising his camera and photographing her. She did not smile again afterward. New houses appeared rapidly, like weeds spreading. The swift pace was unsettling. One day, there would be bare ground. 3 days elapsed, and the construction reached the stage of a complete frame and roof. By the close of the second month, 32 homes had been framed. Of those, 16 were completed, featuring laid sod and polished front porches ready for weekend viewings. Elijah, however, remained undeterred. He proceeded to the county clerk's office to retrieve the most recent sales records. He observed West Haven's name appearing alongside buyers, with the buyers primarily from out of state, Ohio, Florida, and even some originating from California. He meticulously recorded observations, noting each closing date. He verified the location of each home, confirming its presence within the 88-acre zone. All residences were situated inside Otis's boundary. All of them. He even overheard Jessica one morning, speaking on the phone while walking the site. She said, "Yeah, Phase 1's flying off the market. We're starting Phase 2 next month. No issues on our end." The local guy watching from the Ridge, just some nosy landowner trying to stir up drama. "We're clear." Elijah clenched his teeth, but remained silent. She had no idea. He possessed 3 legal opinions supporting his position. He had documented evidence, with timestamps, of construction on the contested land. He had Otis's clause. And crucially, he had time. Allowing them to build wasn't merely a tactic, it was a matter of justice. Each home they finished, every square foot they sold, contributed to a debt they were unaware of accumulating. Elijah had already calculated the figures. If the construction followed the initial plan for all 156 homes, along with the community clubhouse and parkland, the total value of the real estate would approach $70 million. This would be transferred to him. Jessica believed she was developing a neighborhood, but Elijah understood the reality. She was, in effect, expanding his portfolio. However, as the sold signs accumulated, Elijah started questioning how long he could delay the arrival of actual families. The first time Elijah observed children cycling on the newly constructed sidewalks, he experienced a disconcerting sensation in his chest. A profound sadness, not anger nor regret. The children were oblivious. Naturally, they played, circling, chasing, laughing as children do. Their parents watched, enjoying coffee on porches overlooking the Jackson property. This was land Elijah's great-grandfather had cleared manually. A few houses down, a young couple was unpacking boxes. The man waved. Elijah raised his hand a little without knowing why. He was unfamiliar with them. They were unfamiliar with him. The new driveway occupied what had previously been his grandmother's garden. He walked home at a slower pace that day, not due to any need discomfort, but because the anger that had propelled him was beginning to transform into a different feeling. That evening, he was alone in his den, the deed spread out before him, as usual. The clause remained present, tangible, and still his. However, now he saw faces connected to the houses. He recognized people, not suits, not developers. Families were attempting to establish themselves on property they were unaware was not available for purchase. He reached for the telephone and contacted Boone. "I need to discuss something with you," Elijah stated. Boone responded, "I'm listening." Elijah continued, "If I delay until all the houses are completed, the price will increase significantly. However, if I intervene now, I might prevent these people from facing a difficult situation. They've just moved in, Boone. I observed a young girl riding a bicycle with training wheels today." A considerable silence followed. Boone's voice softened. "That presents a difficult ethical decision, Elijah. You are requesting something that is not permissible. It's a personal matter. Legally, you are justified, as Otis confirmed. However, what kind of justice do you seek?" "I am unwilling to cause harm to these individuals," Elijah stated. "Yet, I do want West Haven to be held accountable. They didn't merely trespass. They obliterated my family's history as if it held no significance. Then perhaps the true inquiry is it possible to inflict pain upon them without harming the people who purchased those homes in good faith?" Elijah rubbed his eyes. "Is it possible?" Boone paused once more. "Gaining their commitment requires careful consideration and meticulous attention to detail. Allow them to actively participate in the process, enabling them to take ownership. Ensure your guidance is clear and impactful, so it resonates even before others become involved." Elijah reclined in his chair. The ceiling fan rotated slowly above him. "I observed someone planting a tree today," he remarked quietly. He appeared pleased, as if envisioning this as their permanent residence. "Perhaps it still could be," Boone responded. "The outcome relies on your actions." That night, Elijah experienced little sleep. He revisited the perimeter of the property, holding a flashlight, observing lights shimmering from windows overlooking the southern field. Within those houses, families were establishing themselves, displaying pictures, preparing meals, and putting children to sleep. He couldn't have been responsible for their losses, yet he couldn't overlook the arrogance of West Haven, Jessica Brenner's dismissive gesture, the unanswered calls from their lawyers, and their disregard for generations, as if constructing on unclaimed territory. Elijah remained motionless for an extended period at the tree line. The wind rustled through the tall grass. He recalled Otis, remembering the nights that man had kept watch on the porch, a shotgun resting across his lap, prepared for any trouble. Otis favored immediate action. However, Elijah valued strategy and carefully considered his options. He resolved to wait until the final brick was in place, not to inflict harm upon the families, but to ensure those who had shown disrespect towards his family faced the complete consequence. And then, he would ensure no one ever forgot the name Otis Jackson. But Elijah understood that patience wouldn't simplify the next phase. It would only make it more significant. The notification arrived by mail, enclosed within a polished invitation featuring gold detailing. "You are cordially invited to the grand opening of West Haven Estates, Phase 2 celebration and ribbon-cutting ceremony. Join us for food, live music, and a look at the future of luxury living in Easter Alabama." Elijah examined the card for a minute before setting it on the kitchen counter beside the deed. The event was scheduled for a Saturday morning in April. At that time, 138 homes were completely built. An additional 18 were undergoing final inspections. The community center had recently opened, featuring a pool, tennis courts, and a marble floor lobby resembling a country club. It was being hailed as the crown jewel of the county, and every inch of it was situated on Jackson land. The night before, Elijah carefully ironed his only suit, the one he wore to church, weddings, and funerals, paying special attention to the cuffs, a detail Otis would have emphasized. He packed a leather folder containing the original deed, the notarized clause, the surveyor's report, photo evidence, and legal opinions. He placed it on the passenger seat with the care one would give a newborn child. As he arrived at the newly paved entrance of West Haven Estates, the morning sun broke through. Banners fluttered in the breeze. A white tent stood on the clubhouse lawn where guests enjoyed champagne and sampled small sandwiches off silver trays. He parked near the back of the lot, concealed from view. No one recognized him. Not yet. From the periphery of the gathering, Elijah observed as Jessica Brenner, wearing a vibrant yellow dress and large sunglasses, approached the podium. Microphones were adjusted. Camera flashes went off. "Welcome," she exclaimed. "Today signifies both the completion of our second phase and the beginning of a promising new era for our community." Applause resonated. The mayor stood beside her. Several county officials, whom Elijah had contacted months prior without receiving a response, were also present. Jessica continued, her voice gaining intensity with each phrase. "Thanks to our exceptional team and the backing of our local government, West Haven is now a home to 156 families and expanding." The string quartet played gently in the background. Elijah moved forward deliberately, the sound of his shoes on the gravel noticeable. Jessica looked towards him, but showed no reaction. Not yet. He raised his voice just enough to be heard over the music. "Before you cut that ribbon," he said calmly, and the crowd fell silent, heads turning. Jessica blinked. "Mr. Jackson," she said, her voice strained. "This is a private event." "I understand precisely what this concerns," Elijah stated. "That is why I am present." The mayor appeared doubtful. "Could you please elaborate on the problem?" Elijah raised a leather folder. "I am Elijah Jackson. My family has held title to this land for more than 100 years, and every house, road, tennis court, and mailbox West Haven constructed sits on property that was never legally theirs." Murmurs of confusion rippled through the audience. Jessica moved away from the podium. "We pursued all legal avenues. A zoning error occurred some time back that you failed to fix," Elijah added, opening the file. "And significantly, this deed from 1923 includes a provision drafted by my great-grandfather. It specifies that any building constructed without permission transfers ownership to the deed's owner." He presented the document. A reporter, standing close, moved to photograph the page. Jessica's expression remained unchanged. "You're attempting to deceive us," she whispered. "That clause is invalid after this length of time." Elijah remained unmoved. "I've had this examined by 3 lawyers. They all concurred. It carries legal weight. This land belongs to me, and everything constructed upon it as well." A man in a gray suit spoke quietly to Jessica. She visibly paled. The mayor cleared his throat. "We might need to suspend the ceremony." Jessica faced Elijah again, her voice now firm. "You observed. You monitored our construction, and you remained silent. I informed you on your initial visit that it was my land," he stated calmly. "I saw you smile, and you called security, instructed me to speak with your legal team. So I did." A gasp came from behind you. It could have been a homeowner or someone else. Reporters were now gathering, with flash bulbs popping and pens writing furiously. Jessica appeared as if she'd swallowed glass. "You'll never get away with this," she whispered. "I don't have to get away with anything," Elijah replied. "You passed the folder to me." He closed it carefully and stepped back. The ceremony was halted. No ribbon was cut. Elijah recognized this as merely the initial stage. The significant repercussions hadn't yet materialized. The following morning, Elijah's phone began ringing before sunrise. An unknown number appeared. He allowed it to proceed to voicemail. Subsequently, it rang again and again. By the afternoon, he had accumulated 12 missed calls for voicemails and 2 emails flagged as urgent from West Haven's legal team. By evening, the local news had broadcast a segment entitled "Man Claims Ownership of Entire HOA Community." Is it legal? The anchor appeared bewildered. Elijah was not. He was at his kitchen table with Boone, examining the deed for what seemed like the 100th time. The wording hadn't changed. The ink remained faded but legible. Boone reclined. "They are panicking. They constructed $1 million project on land they didn't own. You possess every advantage." That night, West Haven's president telephoned directly. Elijah didn't recognize the voice. He had never communicated with the man previously, but he detected the strain. "Mr. Jackson, I believe it is time we consider a resolution. We are keen to resolve this matter swiftly and discreetly. The current media coverage is not beneficial to anyone involved. We are ready to provide you with appropriate compensation for the land's assessed value, alongside a goodwill premium." Elijah didn't react with laughter, though it was evident he was restraining himself. "You're suggesting a payment equivalent to the land's previous worth, prior to the construction of the luxury neighborhood? That's a significant offer. It feels like an offensive proposition." Elijah stated, "You didn't simply relocate Earth. You sold property you didn't own. And now you wish to purchase it at a reduced price after you sold it for millions?" Silence followed, and Elijah could hear the breathing on the other end. Controlled. Stiff. "We could challenge this, Mr. Jackson." "You could." Elijah concurred. "But every home you constructed is already sold. Every buyer now has to question who owns their house. You wish to fight? That will be complicated, costly, and public." Another lengthy pause. "We'll be in touch." The line disconnected. 2 days later, the formal offer arrived via courier. The offer included $4.2 million for the land, a non-disclosure agreement, and a confirmation that Elijah would relinquish all claims to the structures built. Boone reacted with disbelief, nearly choking on his coffee. "I've seen offers disguised as bribes before, but this is exceptional," he remarked, pushing the proposal away. Elijah remained silent, his attention fixed on his neighbor's children, using a trampoline recently installed where his grandfather used to park his tractor. He was unwilling to have those children displaced. He was unwilling to have those families hurt. However, he also would not allow West Haven to escape with minimal consequences. Therefore, Elijah prepared a response. He refused the offer, requesting the complete assessed value for each sold home and unsold lot, reduced by a 10% discount for a comprehensive settlement. He pledged not to initiate eviction or repossession, but stipulated that West Haven must cover the legal expenses for each homeowner requiring a revised deed. He insisted on ownership of the community center, parks, and all remaining properties, requesting $61 million. There were no restrictions on speaking publicly, and a public apology was required. Jessica did not contact anyone. Her name was absent from any new official communications, though Elijah received reports. She was reportedly on leave. Some believed she had been dismissed, while others said she resigned. Regardless, the dispute had escalated to the boardroom. During the following 4 weeks, legal representatives from both parties met almost daily. Boone and Simone were seated opposite West Haven's corporate counsel, meticulously negotiating while Elijah largely observed the proceedings. They explored various approaches, proposing a reduced sum, hinting at arbitration, and even implying Elijah had knowingly permitted construction to proceed. Elijah remained composed, stating, "You built on my land. I didn't request it. I cautioned you against it. You disregarded me." Ultimately, West Haven conceded. The concluding agreement was finalized 6 weeks after the unsuccessful ribbon cutting. Elijah's total compensation amounted to $54 million, along with ownership of the community clubhouse, the undeveloped lots, and complete legal authority to oversee the correction of homeowner deeds, ensuring no families were displaced. The settlement was formally revealed at a public press conference. Elijah made brief remarks, expressing gratitude to his great-grandfather for his vision and noting that the past occasionally safeguards the future. He departed quietly, avoiding any media attention or interviews. A desire for tranquility remained. However, Elijah wasn't complete. He needed to ensure Otis's legacy represented something greater than retribution. The funds didn't alter Elijah, not in the anticipated manner. He continued to reside in the familiar house, the aged farmhouse where he'd spent his childhood, where his mother's cooking had permeated the walls with the aroma of fried okra, and where Otis's hammer marks were still evident in the doorframe. He didn't purchase a new truck, didn't relocate to a larger city, didn't install fencing around the land. He did, however, create something tangible. Several months following the agreement, Elijah utilized a segment of the funds, approximately $18 million, to purchase an additional 40-acre parcel of land situated 10 miles east outside the town of Tuskegee. This was land that had remained unclaimed for decades. He designated it the Otis Project. Working alongside local contractors, teachers, and community leaders, Elijah initiated the construction of what he envisioned as a unique neighborhood, designed not for financial gain, but for individuals who had previously been excluded from residing in areas like West Haven. The homes were offered at cost, with mortgage support integrated into the program, and applications were evaluated with empathy rather than relying solely on credit scores. Within the first year, 24 homes were finished, and each was occupied by a family. Individuals from all walks of life, teachers, single parents, factory workers, veterans, were welcomed regardless of their circumstances. One morning, while standing on the first street of the Otis Project, Elijah observed a group of children playing tag on a front lawn. One little boy sparked a memory of his brother Curtis when they were 7 and too stubborn to wear shoes during summer. Boone arrived later that afternoon, holding a clipboard and a wide grin. "You know what they're calling you in town now," he said. Elijah raised an eyebrow. "What?" "The accidental mayor," Boone chuckled. "People say you were given millions, and instead of vanishing, you began constructing front porches." Elijah smiled. Otis didn't nurture hoarders. He cultivated workers. This wasn't merely words. Elijah utilized a portion of the remaining funds to establish a community center in Opelika, offering complimentary tutoring programs, job placement assistance, and a garden where seniors instructed children on cultivating tomatoes that weren't purchased from a grocery store. He also transformed the former West Haven Community Clubhouse, which he now legally owned, into a shared resource center, renaming it Jackson Hall. The tennis courts were made available for complimentary lessons to local young people. The pool offered dedicated swim times for seniors 3 mornings each week. While the Homeowners Association initially disapproved, the homeowners themselves greatly appreciated the changes. Initially, a small number of residents distanced themselves from Elijah, fearing he would seize their homes and viewing him as an adversary. Eventually, they understood that he didn't intend to dismantle what they had established. He simply desired recognition for the work his family had previously undertaken. Now, many approached him directly, seeking information about repairs, suggestions for local services, or guidance on cultivating vegetables in Alabama's challenging red clay. He consistently offered assistance to everyone. "I ain't trying to be a hero," he told a vet, a single mom, and one of the new homeowners. "I simply believe land should never be taken without acknowledging those who labored upon it previously." Yvette nodded. "Well, my son considers you a kind of superhero," Elijah chuckled. "Have you ever seen me attempt to change a flat tire?" He's likely to reconsider quickly. With the commencement of the second year of the Otis Project, Elijah made a final visit to the county archives. This building, where he initially retrieved the original deed, now displayed a framed photograph of Otis Jackson. Below the photo was a plaque that read, "In honor of the man who protected his land so his descendants could protect their community." Elijah stood silently for a moment, then reached into his pocket. He removed a small object wrapped in cloth, Otis's old railroad watch. He carefully set it on the glass counter close to the display. "I always detest being late," Elijah murmured. The sky outside had shifted to that gentle golden hue just prior to sunset, the very shade Otis would often appreciate following a lengthy day in the fields. Elijah smiled, not the smile of a victor, but the smile of one who had fulfilled an obligation. For ultimately, the clause wasn't simply about preventing thieves, it was about ensuring no one overlooked those who preceded them. And now, the land was speaking once more, its voice stronger than the sound of the bulldozers. If this narrative resonated with you, please consider subscribing. More stories such as this, authentic, unfiltered, and grounded in truth, are forthcoming. He entered the bank, his appearance marked by a tattered coat and old shoes. People assumed he was simply another person experiencing homelessness. Then, he spoke calmly, stating, "I own the land this building sits on," and presented documentation to support his claim. The door chimes sounded as it always did upon entry, yet few people acknowledged it. They barely glanced up. A few fleeting looks were all it received. One woman subtly shifted her position to observe him before returning to her computer screen. Another took a sip of her coffee and rolled her eyes, murmuring something to the teller beside her. A man entering the space appeared out of sync with the surroundings, not threatening, simply different. The environment consisted of shiny glass, polished tile, and Bluetooth headsets visible behind the counters. This was Morris Coltrane Langston, age 62, with a thick gray beard. His coat was 2 sizes too large, and his jeans suggested a past no one wished to explore. He moved deliberately, not due to age, but with caution. Each step felt significant, as if he were assessing his place within the setting. He approached the counter where Brittany was working. She offered him a brief look. "Sir, a bank card or ID is required for withdrawals," she stated plainly. Morris offered a gentle smile, though it seemed weary. "I don't require a withdrawal. I need to discuss property," he said. Brittany's eyes widened slightly. She glanced at her colleague, who was visibly trying to contain laughter. "Property?" she asked. "Yes," he confirmed. "I believe I own the land this bank is built on." At that moment, the laughter erupted. The message originated from Cliff Yarrow, the assistant branch manager, who had approached, arms crossed. Cliff was a man who displayed his authority prominently. He made no attempt to conceal his amusement. "Sir, I believe you are at the incorrect building," Cliff stated. "This is not the county records office. You cannot simply enter and declare ownership of a bank." "I did not say I own the bank," Maurice responded, his voice quiet. "I said I own the land. There's a distinction." Now, all eyes were upon him. The security guard, identified as Lee, who typically appeared to be checking his phone near the door, stood up straighter and moved forward. Cliff questioned, "Do you have any paperwork to back that up?" Maurice slowly reached into his coat pocket. For a moment, Lee reacted, conditioned by experience to anticipate a potential threat when a black man reached into a pocket. However, Morris's movements were unhurried and non-threatening. He carried the envelope deliberately, as if accustomed to it. He produced a thick, crumpled packet. The pages were yellowed with worn edges, having been folded and unfolded numerous times. At the top, it read, "Franklin Delroy, 1913 land deed." Below that were stamped legal seals and notary signatures. "I've held on to this since my father passed," I said. "And he kept it since his father passed," Maurice added. The deed belonged to a black-owned cooperative that obtained plots throughout this section of Knoxville during the Reconstruction era. I tapped the envelope gently. "This confirms my grandfather did not sell the land. It was leased. Ownership returned to us following a default, though this information was never shared." Brittany's smirk disappeared. Lee stopped scrolling. Cliff cleared his throat. "I believe it's time for you to leave, sir," he stated. "I think it's time someone examines the contents," Maurice said calmly. Then, an unexpected event occurred. A man from the office furthest to the left, John Delgado, the branch manager, emerged. He had been observing through the glass for the preceding few minutes. He requested the documents. Morris provided them immediately. John escorted them back to his office. A period of silence followed, lasting briefly. Subsequently, 5 minutes elapsed, then 10. Eventually, John appeared. His expression was altered. "Connect me with regional compliance on the line." Immediately, he stated. As phones began to ring and conversations grew concerned, Maurice remained still at his position by the counter. He was anticipating something, and they all understood, instinctively, that it wasn't a monetary request. Cliff walked back and forth behind the teller row, massaging the back of his neck, as if that would aid his comprehension of what he's heard. John Delgado continued on the phone, speaking in brief, strained sentences to someone at corporate. His office blinds were partially closed, but every few seconds, a glimpse of his face emerged from the gap. He wasn't smiling anymore. Brittany stood uncomfortably at her station, looking sideways at Maurice, who hadn't moved from his position. His hands were folded, and documents rested gently on the counter in front of him. "Do you want to sit down?" she finally asked, her voice softer. Maurice shook his head. "I've done enough sitting in my life." A man in a tailored suit and thick-rimmed glasses walked in briskly from a back entrance. His ID badge read Gerald Tisdale, Regional Property and Compliance. He went straight to Delgado's office without a word. Moments later, John opened the door again and waved for Maurice. "Sir, would you mind stepping in for a moment?" Maurice nodded once and retrieved his envelope. His boots made a slight scuffing sound against the tile as he entered the office. As the door closed behind him, the remaining staff members quieted. No one spoke. Even the security guard adjusted his position, uncertain whether to remain nearby or act as if nothing was occurring. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. "Mr. Langston," Gerald stated cautiously, "I've reviewed the original deed and the tax history you provided. Could you please tell us where you've been keeping these documents?" "My father kept it in a box of his belongings," Maurice responded. "He was a carpenter, building houses in Alcoa and Maryville before his knees failed. After he passed away, I kept the papers in a locker at a storage unit I used when I lacked permanent housing." Delgado appeared astonished. "You're saying this land was never sold? That the trust was still active?" Maurice retrieved a smaller, more recent envelope and gave it to Gerald. Inside was a typed letter from a small firm in Chattanooga, a probate specialist named Lena Fry, confirming the lapse in city filings and the reversion clause in the original agreement. The letter was dated 6 months ago. I only found it after she assisted me in reviewing some of my dad's old files. "Thought it was junk at first," Gerald said, staring at the paper. His mouth opened a little, but he didn't speak. "Legally," Maurice explained, "this building stood on land that was part of my grandfather's estate. The lease agreement had been temporary. As the bank underwent mergers and changes in ownership over the years, the arrangement wasn't renewed. They simply built on the land, presuming no one would inquire." Delgado rubbed his temple. "That represented decades of transactions," Maurice stated, "and not a single one examined the records far enough back. Everyone seemed to think the past had resolved itself." Gerald rose quickly and gazed out the office window. "We need to involve legal right away," he stated. "Already done," John responded quietly. A voice drifted from outside the office, speaking too loudly. Why would a homeless man return for this now? What would he possibly do with a piece of land beneath a bank? Inside, Maurice noticed. He glanced towards the window, then resumed looking at Gerald. "I didn't come for money," he said. "I came seeking the truth, and perhaps a measure of respect." Gerald turned, finally meeting my eyes. There was a pause. "You are not wrong, but while discussions focused on compliance and liability, something else was unfolding in the lobby. Whispers had escalated to murmurs, and one employee was already texting someone outside the bank. The story, as it turns out, began long before Maurice ever entered that bank. Prior to the advent of smartphones, before suburban expansion consumed agricultural land, before the concept of a man like Maurice could be envisioned, standing serenely with a document, contesting the very core of a multi-million-dollar organization. In 1913, Franklin Delroy, Morris's grandfather, was 23 years old and already recognized within Blount County for his skilled workmanship. His hands constructed churches, schoolhouses, and porches that remained standing a century later. Unbeknownst to many, Franklin was also a member of a discreet, close-knit group of black tradesmen, farmers, and ministers who combined their resources to purchase land. The purpose wasn't financial gain, but a matter of dignity. They identified as the East Bluntland Cooperative, and throughout the years, they obtained small plots on the periphery of what was then essentially cow pasture. However, Franklin, ever the visionary, included a specific provision in his deed. Should the land ever undergo development, leasing, or a claim by another party without a sale, ownership would return to his descendants after a specified duration. In 1927, a lumber company made a payment to lease the land for a limited time. Subsequently, a warehouse was constructed, followed by a small credit union. By the 1970s, that credit union had transformed into a regional bank. And when it was acquired again in 2003, all of the original documents were misplaced, overlooked, or lost within the new ownership. The Delroy family was never notified. Franklin was gone by that point. Morris's father, Jasper Langston, attempted to preserve the family's history. However, circumstances grew difficult. Employment opportunities disappeared, and Jasper began drinking. The traditional stories evolved into mere bedtime stories, losing any sense of verifiable truth. Morris recalled sitting on the porch in his youth, listening to his dad describe the plot by the rail tracks that Granddaddy owned. Yet, it held little significance for him. The stories remained just that, stories, until he matured and understood how families like his were frequently excluded from their own history. In 2020, when COVID caused widespread closures and Morris was residing in a church basement in Sevierville, he finally sorted through the last of his father's possessions. Among them, he discovered the original deed carefully wrapped in wax paper, and within it, a small note written in his dad's handwriting. "If you find this, don't let him tell you we didn't leave anything behind." Morris took that note with great importance. He dedicated months to research at the public library. He made trips to the county clerk's office. He consulted with Lena Fry, the probate attorney who remained professional when he shared the story with her. She located the land records and carefully compared parcel numbers, and she verified his findings. The land, now valued at millions, had been leased, not sold. The original clause remained in effect. No legal purchase had ever occurred. Consequently, after years of homelessness, this situation seems quite unusual. Morris entered the building constructed upon his grandfather's land and stated something unexpected. "I believe this belongs to me." At the bank, John Delgado now had the documents spread across his desk. They contained a century's worth of signatures, carbon copies, and ink stamps from courthouses that no longer existed. Gerald, the regional compliance officer, examined one page as if it had committed a personal offense. According to this clause, he stated, "The property returns to the original family if the lease expires without renewal or sale." John confirmed this had occurred twice, and the family was not notified. "That's correct." A significant silence followed. Then Gerald quietly expressed concern, saying, "We're in trouble." Maurice remained seated opposite them, silent. He showed no sign of a smile. However, a sense of calm was evident on his face. It was as if a man had, at long last, joined together all the pieces of a puzzle and possessed the perseverance to complete it. As events aligned within that office, a woman on her lunch break began live streaming the growing disturbance outside the bank. The unfolding situation quickly transcended their internal narrative. The lobby's ambience underwent a change. Initial silent assessment evolved into quiet wonder. The atmosphere then became something different altogether, a palpable sense of nervous anticipation. A teller had moved away from her workspace and was positioned by the coffee machine, appearing to stir sugar while observing the office door as if expecting someone to enter. The security guard had repositioned himself, now standing nearer to Morris's chair, seemingly not for protection, but perhaps to observe. Beyond the glass partitions, John Delgado's office was full. Gerald Tisdale was participating in a video conference with a group of legal representatives from corporate, their faces difficult to interpret. A senior counsel, Mark Levin, repeatedly posed the same inquiry. How did this oversight occur? No one could provide a satisfactory explanation. The numerous transfers of ownership involving various parent companies and banks had obscured the documentation until Morris brought it back to their attention. "There's a public title gap," Gerald stated. "No signed release, no recorded sale." The reversion clause was never satisfied. Mark Levin moved closer to the screen. "Does this man, Langston, possess the original documents?" John stated that he has more than just documents. He has lineage, and we verified the parcel data. It's the same land. The only alterations were the asphalt and steel constructed upon it. Mark pinched his nose. "Okay, here's what we need. Secure a release from this man. Offer a small settlement. Remove him from the building before the press arrives." Maurice, seated quietly nearby, understood their thinking without needing to hear the discussion. He understood the atmosphere. After decades of observing how people assess your value, John ended the call and turned to him. "Mr. Langston, would you be willing to settle this today? We could quietly arrange compensation, something equitable." Morris folded his arms. What's fair to you? John paused. That would require negotiation. But if we act quickly, we could avoid unwanted publicity. Maurice chuckled softly. Unwanted by whom? John momentarily looked surprised. A knock sounded at the glass door. A woman, identifiable by the local news logo on her lanyard, smiled and raised her phone. Hello. We've received information that someone entered with a land deed asserting ownership of the bank property. May we speak with Mr. Langston? John's face visibly drained. Who informed you? A voice from the lobby murmured. The live streams have exceeded 12,000 viewers. Morris rose to his feet deliberately. There's nothing to be concerned about. I'm not intending to cause a disturbance. Gerald approached. Mr. Langston, please understand that this situation requires careful handling. It would benefit everyone involved if we could maintain discretion. I attempted a subtle approach, Maurice stated. I'm accustomed to quiet. It defined much of my existence. It yielded no progress. A pause settled over the group. Gerald seemed poised to object, but a palpable truth lingered, inescapable. Returning to the lobby, Brittany spoke softly to Maurice. The amusement had vanished from her face. Do you truly possess this? She inquired. I have always possessed it, he replied. The recollection seemed to simply vanish. She lowered her gaze, a hint of embarrassment visible. I'm sorry. Morris's expression eased a little. It's not your fault. You were instructed on how to behave when someone like me enters. The bank's doors opened once more, and 2 additional reporters entered. A man carried a boom microphone over his shoulder. Another began recording with his phone. Cliff attempted to block their entry. This is private property. A reporter responded, observing Maurice. Not for long. As inquiries began from the media, Maurice did not seek attention. He instead glanced back at the familiar envelope he held, the one that held his family's history across generations, and understood it was time for the world to know it. Maurice needed no microphone. He needed no formal announcement. He simply needed to remain where he was. That was sufficient. A reporter, a woman in her 40s named Kimber Rowland from WBR, approached. Mr. Langston, could you verify that you assert ownership of the land the bank occupies? Maurice met her gaze, unwavering. I'm not asserting anything, he stated. I'm presenting facts, and the document in my hand demonstrates what none of you ever took the time to investigate. Kimber nodded thoughtfully, recognizing the significance in his tone. What outcome are you pursuing with this? Maurice didn't respond immediately. He turned to address the increasingly large gathering. There were customers, employees, and security present, with some people watching from the sidewalk. What I'm hoping for, he said finally, is that the next time someone walks in looking like I do, maybe people won't react with amusement first. The silence that followed was palpable. The young man who had been laughing earlier near the coffee machine suddenly looked down at his shoes. Brittany tightened her grip on her ID badge and avoided his gaze. Cliff shifted uncomfortably and cleared his throat. Look, sir, I didn't mean any disrespect. You need to comprehend. We simply weren't prepared. There was laughter. Maurice intervened. You all responded that way. The moment I entered the room, you observed my coat, my shoes, the discoloration on my hands, and you determined I was insignificant. No one spoke. Have you ever considered how many people you're likely to dismiss each day? Moving around here as if you possess all the knowledge. As if you've already assessed someone's narrative merely by viewing their exterior. John Delgado moved ahead, attempting to redirect the situation. Mr. Langston, we are ready to offer a formal apology and begin settlement negotiations. Maurice gave him a drawn-out, weary look. Do you still believe this concerns finances? A teenager with a camera phone murmured to his friend, out of view of the reporters, Dude, this person is really committed. Observe the documents. Kimber, perceiving something more significant, inquired, Where have you been until now? What prompted you to come forward at this time? Maurice sighed, not in annoyance, simply in contemplation. Following my dad's passing, I lost interest in matters of this nature. I was preoccupied with basic survival, taking on sporadic jobs like roofing, welding, and janitorial work whenever available. Maintaining stable housing proved difficult when people avoided direct interaction. I experienced periods of both prosperity and hardship, followed by even more challenging times. He paused. There were nights I slept under bridges and mornings I cleaned the same floors people used to ignore me. However, I never discarded that envelope. The memory of every shelter I stayed in, every town I passed through, remained with me. He held it up gently. It's all I had left from a man who believed we were worth more than people thought. And one day, I simply grew weary of silence. A woman from the crowd spoke softly. You kept the deed all these years? Maurice nodded. 50 years it stayed in our family. Passed from one calloused hand to another, Kimber asked. And what now? He surveyed the bank lobby, his gaze lingering on each employee who had assessed him that morning. What now? He repeated. Now you recall my name. From a corner location, Gerald spoke to John. This is going to be a public relations disaster. However, the individuals within the bank weren't observing Gerald. They were observing Maurice. Truly observing. Some for the first time, as if a barrier had been removed. Not just from his narrative, but from theirs as well. You believe I was unseen? Maurice stated softly. I remained present. You simply didn't observe carefully enough. However, the outside world had already begun to notice. They perceived a man who brought more than just a deed to that building. He carried evidence that dignity isn't derived from affluence. It arises from steadfastly maintaining one's identity. By the following morning, the narrative had spread beyond state lines. Every local news station in Tennessee aired a rendition of it. Some reported inaccuracies. A report suggested Maurice had assumed control of the bank, a claim that proved false. Nevertheless, the message spread. Residents of Blount County, particularly older individuals, began searching through attics and storage boxes, questioning what they might have overlooked. College students shared excerpts online with accompanying text, such as this exemplifies generational theft. To them, Maurice wasn't a news item. He represented an alert and a sign. At the bank, the situation quickly worsened. Legal representatives from the corporation arrived from elsewhere. Security personnel were now joined by local police officers patrolling the parking lot, employed for crowd management. Demonstrators had assembled along the sidewalk, displaying cardboard signs. Their messages included phrases like respect land rights. Not just a deed, a legacy. He was right all along. Maurice hadn't organized the gathering, nor had he requested anyone to attend, yet they came. Inside the building, the atmosphere was tense. Gerald Tisdale was pacing once more, his face flushed as he managed calls from corporate and press liaisons. John Delgado was in his office, with the blinds completely shut, feeling the burden of everything. Maurice was in the break room, drinking coffee from paper cup. Never thought I'd be allowed in here, he remarked, mostly to himself. Kimber Rowland had returned, and her camera crew was filming quietly from the parking lot. She wasn't trying to create problems. She was simply waiting for the story to unfold. That afternoon, a legal representative, Clay Addison, entered the bank. He possessed a clean-shaven appearance, a southern drawl, and wore a silk tie that appeared more valuable than Morris's entire wardrobe. He did not offer a smile. Mr. Langston, Clay began, settling across from him, let me start by saying our firm recognizes the validity of your documentation. We are here to discuss terms. Maurice listened intently, remaining still. You placed our client in a complex situation. We acknowledge the oversight and are ready to present a substantial financial offer for the permanent transfer of ownership. A paper was slid across the table by Clay. Maurice looked at it, then raised his gaze. You believe this is the core issue? He inquired, his voice level. It's a considerable sum, Clay stated. It's a price, Maurice replied, and it doesn't come close to covering what you're attempting to resolve. Clay released a sharp breath. What would be acceptable to you? Maurice leaned forward, composed but resolute. I want a plaque with my grandfather's name displayed out front. I also want the official record corrected with the city, and I want a foundation established in his name, one that provides housing for families who have experienced similar circumstances. Clay blinked. Are you serious? I'm absolutely serious. There was a significant pause. Then Clay said, I will present this to the board. You please do that. Information about the negotiation became public the same day. And when it did, an unforeseen development occurred. People began making donations. People donated online, in person, and by check. One woman from Jackson traveled 2 hours to personally hand Maurice a $20 bill and express her gratitude for him, ensuring they weren't forgotten. The bank subsequently released a brief statement later that week, stating, "We recognize the validity of Mr. Maurice Langston's claim and are working in good faith to resolve this matter respectfully. We have deep appreciation for the legacy of Franklin Delroy and the community he helped build." While corporate and sanitized, this statement was unexpected. Regarding Maurice, there was no celebration. No press conference was held. He simply exited the bank one afternoon, carrying the same envelope he had entered with. However, this time he wasn't alone. 3 generations of Delroys stood with him in spirit, and hundreds more supported them. While legal teams assessed expenses and public relations teams prepared announcements, the most important aspect had already transpired. Someone like Maurice had finally been acknowledged, and the narrative was no longer controlled by the bank. It belonged to everyone who had ever been forgotten. The sun shone that morning. Maurice Langston stood in front of the bank again. Now, he wasn't standing on disputed land. He was standing on his grandfather's land, officially recognized by the city of Knoxville as part of the Franklin Delroy Legacy Trust. It wasn't just a name on paper anymore. A new plaque had been installed outside the bank's main entrance, embedded in a small brick pedestal near the sidewalk. Bronze letters, clear and lasting. Dedicated to Franklin Delroy, 1890 to 1954, builder, father, landowner. His legacy endures. Maurice touched it softly. The plaque felt cool beneath his fingertips. He remained silent. Words weren't necessary. A small group had assembled for the unveiling. Community leaders, students from the local university, reporters, and some of the same bank staff who previously ridiculed him were present. Brittany stood at the rear, her hands clasped, attempting to make eye contact with Maurice whenever he turned. This time he succeeded. The foundation he had proposed was already being established. A partnership with a local nonprofit was formed within weeks of the settlement. The Delroy Housing Fund would provide grants to families at risk of homelessness, particularly those who have been disadvantaged by legal complexities and overlooked actions. "I didn't desire revenge," Maurice told Kimber Rowland in his final interview. "I simply wanted the truth to endure beyond the falsehood." It had taken years to reach this point. For years, he had experienced being overlooked, marginalized, and disregarded. However, the instant he entered through those glass doors, holding a creased envelope and a legacy of suffering, things began to shift. And currently, he was simply a man identified by a name. He had acquired a modest, well-kept house not distant from the outskirts of Alcoa, close to the same areas where his father had previously constructed porches and fences. It wasn't elaborate, merely a neat area, a functional sink, a bed to relax in. Occasionally, he would sit on a plastic chair outside, sipping coffee and greeting children cycling up the slope. On other occasions, he collaborated with local high schools, discussing land ownership, family histories, and the consequences of oblivion with students. "Preserve your documents," he advised them. "Retain your names. Ensure no one erases your people from the narrative." People now referred to him as Mr. Langston. At times, even Sir, but the designation he valued most was the one his grandfather had attained: builder. It wasn't about buildings, but about something larger: legacy. He never anticipated forgiveness from the bank. However, it wasn't necessary. What he required, he received: an acknowledgement, a correction, and the opportunity for those who followed to declare, "I belong here too." The bank continued its operations, but the employees carried themselves differently. They engaged with people they had previously overlooked. They posed questions rather than making assumptions. The transformation wasn't flawless, but it represented a meaningful shift. One afternoon, several months following the resolution of events, Brittany approached him outside the community center. "Mr. Langston?" she asked, her voice betraying nervousness. "Yes," he replied. I've been taking night classes. Real estate law." He raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" he inquired. "After everything that happened, I realized how much I didn't know. About ownership, history, how things get passed down or lost. Morris smiled, slow and genuine. Good for you. She paused. I'm sorry for how I treated you that first day. He nodded. An apology wasn't necessary. It was owed to the individual who would next enter. She considered this thoughtfully, responding, yes, I will. He retrieved a copy of the original deed, a replica, to be exact, from his coat and gave it to her. Keep this. Use it in class. Teach someone something. She accepted it with care, as if it were fragile. As she departed, Morris looked towards the street and observed a group of teenagers assembling at the bus stop across the road. One of them gestured towards the plaque. The others drew closer to listen. He remained silent, allowing them to continue. He simply observed, a quiet sense of pride welling up within him as his grandfather's name emerged in the discussion once more. Perhaps that's how genuine transformation truly begins. Not through rage, nor solely through the pursuit of justice, but through remembrance and the bravery to keep it alive. Should you experience a feeling while hearing Morris's narrative, do not hold it back. Spread it. Discuss it. And if there's a family name you haven't mentioned in some time, vocalize it. The impact of legacies endures only when we actively preserve them. Subscribe for more stories that illuminate the true meaning of dignity.